We know that mouse mode gaming is on the horizon, but could the company that brought us double screen gaming also bring us double mouse gaming? I've talked in the past about how a whole range of games could use cursor mode, from artistic experiences to shoot 'em ups to adventure games. But what are the options for a double mouse enabled gameplay experience? It's not immediately obvious what those experiences could be, but I've come to the conclusion that while these game opportunities may be relatively rare, there are some quite interesting possibilities. In this video, we will start by discussing the likelihood of using dual mouse controls and some of the additional gameplay features they could utilize, and then we'll look at 5 different examples of specific instances where dual mouse gameplay could work. I should say up front that I do expect this feature to be quite rarely used, and of course we have precedent with this in the lack of take-up for the IR camera even among internal Nintendo developers. EPD4 have used it extensively in their games, but most games didn't, and this was a bespoke piece of technology built into the Switch's Joy-Con. In this case, dual mouse mode is essentially an extra affordance thrown up by the presence of two Joy-Con that both have a mouse mode functionality. Its emergence is almost a byproduct, and therefore there is no particular need for Nintendo to indulge it. But I think, and actually I hope, that they will. One last obvious advantage of having two Joy-Con is that it permits two players, and having two concurrent mice seems like a great way to go with certain gameplay styles. Imagine having a draw-off in Mario Paint, or having two armies concurrently controlled in a real-time strategy game. Many party experiences would benefit too, I'm sure. One query I've often seen levelled against the concept of the Joy-Con mouse is that people would need a mouse mat to operate it, and this would limit the flexibility of being able to play your way in different spaces. But actually, I don't think that this will be a problem at all. For one thing, Nintendo will be more than happy to sell custom mouse mats using their particular imagery and IPs. But it's been a long time since I'd used an optical mouse, but back then, with limited desk space and stacks of library books, I'd often use the mouse on a book stack on my lap, even up the side of the desk, and it would always do the job just fine. It was quite fun to experiment. If anything, I expect Nintendo to anticipate the criticism and make a virtue of it. Imagine a game where you have to run the mouse along all sorts of surfaces at all sorts of angles. I think your way to play could easily involve people using it on ceilings, up walls, on couch cushions, and so on. But from this point, we're going to look at one-person dual mouse experiences only, starting with our number one. Number one, real-time RPG combat. Perhaps the single biggest opportunity it strikes me is in games such as Xenoblade Chronicles and potentially Pokemon Legends ZA, which have multiple protagonists involved in battle using a real-time combat system. The problem, of course, is that you need one hand primarily to control the direction the characters are moving in, and the other hand to primarily control the actions you choose to utilize. There's a little bit of switching between buttons and analog sticks for specific commands or to control the camera, but essentially you can only do one of these things at a time. However, mouse mode frees you from that restriction. By employing a cursor in the manner of Pikmin 4, one that generally hugs the ground but occasionally snaps to an enemy, they can take character movement away from being the responsibility of the analog stick entirely. You would simply target the place that you want the character to head towards, and the character would automatically head in this direction. This frees thumbs to click buttons, and buttons mean battle options. Effectively, you could utilize this technique to have two characters concurrently engaged in battle actions, both controlled by the player. And the ideal game to showcase this, frankly, would be Pokemon Legends ZA. Now, that's not to say that they will do this. Despite Nintendo's close relationship with Game Freak, the company has previously shown a degree of skepticism towards Nintendo's unique features at times, with Sun and Moon not even utilizing the 3DS's 3DFX. Still, you can bet that Nintendo consulted heavily with their development partners during the development of the Switch 2, and having a Joy-Con for the trainer and a Joy-Con used to control the Pokemon would be a pretty cool way to play, and from Game Freak's point of view, it could be quite low risk. The game has to include a traditional method of play anyway to cater to existing Switch users, but by giving a significant extra feature to the Switch 2 version, they may prompt more people to pick up the game's Switch 2 edition, which will likely retail at a higher price. Another title which could find huge potential in this is the Xenoblade series. Already, Xenoblade screens are incredibly options rich, so freeing up the user to press more buttons may be exceptionally useful in a combat situation. Example number 2, vertical gameplay. Another option for dual control mouse mode is what I'm going to dub vertical gaming. Traditionally, games are played over a flat plane, perhaps with the odd mountain or cliff in the way. Breath of the Wild made climbing and paragliding a core mechanic, introducing a much greater verticality than we normally see, but you can only climb and glide for short distances. The world is still significantly wider than it is tall. Tears of the Kingdom solved this by having 3 different levels, but essentially they are flat planes stitched together. Now, part of the reason for this is clearly that most of our experience of the world is on flat planes as well, and so it makes sense for games to replicate this common experience of life. But also, climbing isn't intrinsically all that interesting as a player because it limits you to a 2D space and generally restricts the central character from utilizing most skills. We've all played levels where you have to cope with this restriction as part of a challenge within a level, but generally it's a relief for the climb to be over and the game to continue. But of course, Nintendo games haven't always been primarily horizontal. Indeed, if you think back to their oldest games like Donkey Kong, vertical play was a major push. So imagine this. You approach a wall in, let's say, Breath of the Wild, and the camera tilts so that now you are underneath Link. You go into dual mouse mode and you get to move your hand over the wall. The rumble gives you clues as to the texture of the wall and the ability you have to grip it. You move the mouse backwards to haul yourself up, then click to release and move the mouse forward to reach out again, feeling across the wall for places where it's safe to climb. Now, this might seem like a bit of a gimmick, but Nintendo has used gimmicks in its AAA titles before. Who can forget the ball in a maze shrine in Breath of the Wild, or having to waggle the Joy-Con in a circular motion to throw Cappy in a circle in Super Mario Odyssey? But I think there is potential for a discrete vertical game, and conveniently, in an age where Nintendo wants to capitalize on its legacy franchises, it uses some of its most iconic and yet underutilized mascot-type characters, the Ice Climbers. People know Nana and Popo through Super Smash Bros., but there seems no reason for them to ever actually feature in a new game of their own, with many of the game's original staff retired or even having passed away, although Kazuaki Morita is still kibitzing on games like Super Mario Bros. Wonder and Tears of the Kingdom, picking up special thanks credits. Having a senior figure at Nintendo with an understanding of the original Ice Climber game is going to be critical. Nintendo has revived franchises like Punch-Out and Famicom Detective Club before, but they are very careful to root the new project in the old one and have people involved who understood what the original game represented. Still, a new Ice Climbers would have to be largely a reinvention from the ground up, a Kid Icarus Uprising kind of deal. But I think there is huge potential with it. Like in the original game, you would have to progress to new platforms which could have challenges and creatures to face, but between these, you would have the challenge of ascending sheer walls, and you would need to use all of your ice climbing skills. Buttons could be utilized to go between different types of ice pick, and you would need to use the rumble to figure out where the ice is too smooth and slippery to traverse, and where there is good grip. Moreover, you would be able to feel via rumble within whether there are creatures inside the ice waiting to break out. As creatures try to attack you, you could use both analog sticks to look back and forth and down and up as you're harangued by birds and other enemies. This is where they could utilize an additional technology besides simply mouse mode and rumble, a technology which could be built into the Joy-Con straps themselves. Essentially, it would be resistive scrolling. In the original trailer, we never get a good sense of the base of the mouse mode add-on devices. We see the Joy-Con clip in vertically, but what if, using probably the magnetic functionality of the Joy-Con as a kind of trigger, the shape of the base could subtly change with the level of resistance being increased or decreased. So depending on the context of the game, the mice could feel icy smooth, or rather more resistance could be added as you move your hands back and forth across the surface. Now, I'm not sure how likely this is to be something included in the Joy-Con straps this time out, not at launch, but it's not fundamentally different in concept, it seems to me, than the switches that allow vacuum cleaners to be better acclimatized to smooth floors or carpets, except utilized here for a gameplay functionality. In other words, it's something which could be easily added on at a later date, relatively inexpensively. So even if these weren't available at launch, for an ice climbers game, they might feel like selling extra custom straps to be a decent way of bumping up the price and increasing the value to them of the product. They've done this before with packing technology after all. Now, you wouldn't just use Rumble to figure out where you can climb and where not to, but you would experience the mice suddenly becoming slippy and in other parts resistive. To some degree, this could be simulated purely through software. Anybody who has toggled the sensitivity on a computer cursor will know how different it can suddenly feel when you make that adjustment, and I don't think they need to have a physical component in the Joy-Con straps of this to work. But if they did, I think this could be a genuinely different and engaging type of gameplay experiences that leverages one of Nintendo's classic franchises to boot. Number 3, vehicle and shooting titles. So let's use Star Fox as an example for this, although it might not be the only or even the best one. Traditionally, Star Fox has operated as a rail shooter, with some elements of controls taken out of your hands. On the one hand, this makes the gameplay more focused and compelling, but I also think it accounts in part for the series' struggle to reinvent itself for a new generation, as these games can appear rather simplistic to people who are not used to them. But the realistic challenge is that there's no way to intuitively control multiple things at once. If you had a Star Fox with completely open controls, what might it look like? Clearly assistive automatic targeting and movement would help, but if you wanted the player to have the ability to be truly immersed, there are lots of things that you would want available. You would need to control the ship. You may need to control the camera. You would need to control the gunship and target. And you would need to do this in real time. So let's start with the ship. With one mouse flat against a surface, you instantly limit the amount of input you need to be worried about when controlling the ship's direction. Pulling the mouse back sends the ship up, pushing the mouse forward sends it down, and you can still move it left or right. The analog stick on this Joy-Con is therefore freed up for camera control. But in between, you can keep the mouse steady, which keeps the ship on an even course. What about the right Joy-Con? Why, firing, of course. I think Star Fox is one of the franchises that would most benefit from this kind of dual mouse arrangement, but it's also one that I don't think Nintendo will necessarily want to announce too far in advance. Why? 3 magic little words: Star Fox Zero. They will not want the game to be compared at all to Star Fox Zero, and the merest whiff of this being a seam of Switch 2 related headlines may make them faintly nauseous. Now, they may have a get out with the play experience events around the globe, as they can let people actually attest to the, hopefully, easy mode of play for the new style, but even then I think it's unlikely that they take the risk. Therefore, while I think a Star Fox game using these kinds of controls is plausible, and maybe even probable in the long term, I could see Nintendo saving this for year 2 or 3 of the console's life, where a lot less is riding on its success, and possibly they may choose to simply shadow drop a demo of the game so that people can experience it before they get a chance to read about some of Star Fox's previous mishaps. This is also where I could see those persistent rumours about a Star Fox Adventure port actually having some validity. You re-familiarise people first with the franchise right off the bat in the Switch 2 era, and then a couple of years later create a brand new entry. There is a precedent for this in the treatment of recent Nintendo franchises with similarly beleaguered recent histories. We had Pikmin 3 and Pikmin Bloom to warm people up before Pikmin 4, while Metroid Samus Returns and Metroid Prime Remastered preceded Metroid Dread and Metroid Prime 4, respectively. Example number 4, adventure games. One of the low-key biggest delights for me of the Switch era has been the shock resurrection of the Famicom Detective Club franchise. The Girl Who Stands Behind especially is a wonderful piece of fiction. Emio is a fine successor, and we know from interviews at the time that there is every expectation that the franchise will continue into the future. The game's approach will naturally suit a mouse mode with a cursor being used to survey the area, but what is better than searching for clues one-handed? Why searching two-handed? It's not just that you'd be able to survey an area far faster using this, but there are also particular uses that you could put to use with two-handed searching. Let's say you want to open and shut cupboard doors, lift the lids off toilet cisterns to see what's hidden inside, hold a piece of paper with one hand and unfurl it with the other, tear open packages, peel tape off walls while holding the wallpaper back so it doesn't have a telltale tear left behind. The dual mouse approach would simulate these experiences far more intuitively than any single mouse option. But this is yet another mechanic focused on physical actions, and I think that's exciting. But what's special about Famicom Detective Club is the conversation mechanics. I think they really perfected this in Emio, where you rarely, if ever, end up reaching dead ends in the conversation, and you can usually nudge the conversations down interesting paths in a free-flowing manner, just like you're investigating and discussing with real suspects. And at key moments, you can stop and think and review. Now, I have never been a teenage detective in Japan in the late 1980s, not that I'll confess to anyway, but my hunch is that such people are accustomed to thinking as they engage in conversation and not just in the gaps between. Imagine, therefore, if you had one menu screen for managing what you say and another for what you think. With one hand, you could make a note of key details or try to retrieve information, to ask or control the expression on your face to reassure or intimidate, while with the other hand, you could control the flow of the conversation. One Joy-Con dictating what you think, the other dictating what you say. This would probably be tricky to enact without a real-time element to the gameplay, and this isn't ideal unless they localize the games for different regions in terms of the speech. And even then, making the precise timings work when different languages have different word orders and words may take more or less time to say could become tricky. For this reason, I'm not sure how the dual thought and speaks mechanics are completely workable, but at the very least, there's an interesting avenue here that I hope they will consider exploring. Number 5, party games. These are experiences that I can't quite picture as full-fledged games, but in a collection like 1-2-Switch, Clubhouse Games, or Nintendo Land, or even as side quests in Mario or Zelda titles, these seem pretty plausible. One possibility, it seems to me, is some kind of Diablo-type game. Think of the way the jump ropes were incorporated into Mario Odyssey, and now imagine having to make subtle hand movements to keep the Diablo spinning for as long as you can. Then there's single-player Pong, evolving the eternal pastime of chucking a ball from one hand to the other by adding in all sorts of video gamey obstacles to make it a bit more engaging. This is both the area where I had the least ideas, and yet the area where I'm sure that Nintendo will be the most active. Nintendo Cube are inevitably going to be producing Mario Party games and very likely another Clubhouse Games in the Switch 2's life, and so utilizing a new Joy-Con feature seems like an obvious next step for them. Of course, the video pinging onto the screen right now contains more information on cursor-controlled gaming possibilities using this time just the single mouse. Thank you so much for watching, thank you to my Patreon supporters, and I shall see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.